outpatient program. It was $850.
That she was like getting paid to the counselor?
Yes. So we had to talk about, you wouldn't even know what the family would do with that. I mean, and really looking at how are you going to provide down the road. I mean, you can't keep up this level of care for all the patients you meet. It's just not feasible. So, I mean, we really had to go down some of those roads, and I was just really shocked at the lack of understanding. Mm-hmm.
So I mean, oh, go ahead, sorry. Oh, I was just going to say you did a great thing by involving, the field instructors, because that's why, the faculty liaisons, that's the service that we want to provide and step in and further educate, because we want to make sure that these students are prepared to enter the field. Mm-hmm. So
for education's sake, what ethical things were in conflict with each other, and what potential harm was there to anyone?
Well, my concern was just a couple different things. Conflict of interest. My other piece.
In what way? Which interest against which interest?
The fact that she was giving her personal money to one of her clients, essentially.
But it wasn't her client.
As a student, I think when you're sitting in there, that's considered your client as well. That's how I view it, at least. And so she was doing that. My other piece was confidentiality, because I had a big concern with her when she said she was going to donate it in the child's name to the foundation. I had a big concern with that as well, because she learned that name from being inside our walls. And she would also be putting that child's name in a national database that that child is not, or the mother is not consenting to. I had real issues with it. Anything else? Yeah.
Were you shocked initially by her behavior, or after you had educated her and that you said it didn't seem as if she were understanding?
Yeah, at the beginning, she didn't seem like she understood why it was wrong. I was floored.
So after she was educated, did she understand?
Yeah, she came a long way. We had a lot of discussions, some extra meetings with the faculty liaison. Typically it's like 1 or 2 visits in the 2-semester practicum, and I it was the first semester, but I think she came maybe 4 times, just so that we could have some more of those one-on-one conversations with her and really exploring some of those things and making sure she had a better understanding. I was much more comfortable by the end of the 2-semester practicum.
Was she master's level or bachelor's?
Mm-hmm. Master's.
But her first question was, were you surprised? I actually wasn't. A lot of us go into social work for different reasons. So because I have 2 students now sitting here next to me, I can see one of my clients saying something and one of them saying, hey, I want to do this. And I think unless someone has had a conversation with you, why would you know that, even if you're a master level student, that might not be appropriate? I wouldn't know. I never touched the code of ethics until I went to school. I was psychology undergrad. We didn't talk about that kind of stuff in undergrad. I know why I went to social work. I wouldn't be able to help people. What a better way to help a person than help their kid go to camp? But after you talk to me, I guess, so I'm glad because that was going to be my question. Were you comfortable with it once she finished the 2 semesters? Because, that is someone that we're letting come into the professional world, that will have access to clients in whatever capacity.
Well, and as far as not having a knowledge base prior, to do a practicum with us, you have to have a 4-day orientation that really goes super in-depth. You have to be CPI trained. John Paul over there has just gone through all of it. It's pretty extreme and intense, and they let you know what you can and cannot do with the patients.
Yeah, I have it.
It's very intense, and it really goes over a lot of different things. And
What's the training you said?
So we have a behavioral health specific orientation, and I make all of the students go through that to be a practicum student. It's just
What was it called, PPSI?
CPI, it's a crisis prevention intervention. But they do, that's
Just part of it.
yeah, that's just part of it.
So I was gonna say, that's just like part of ours.
I'm
Yeah.
impressed because we don't give our students that, but we get it as employees in our homes. So I'm very impressed that, like, I'm worried like I go to the right place.
SSM is very thorough, because I'm a nurse as well, and I did my clinical at, I guess, St. Joe's, Winsville. I've never seen anything as thorough as SSM. I was like, I'm so tired.
Yes, yes. I mean, especially with the behavioral health, we have it's so acute and just very dangerous for students in general if they don't have that knowledge base. I would hate for a student to be in any sort of situation where a patient came up and they had no idea what to do. Part of that personally just is from an experience I had where I was bitten by a patient as a student. And it was because I had no idea what to do because no one had ever told me as a student I didn't need to know that information. So I make it mandatory.
I have one other question. And maybe it just, it's a, a long discussion, but I work with a lot of interns and I supervise several students. And I think when we look at our code of ethics, it's a cultural thing sometimes that you have. That's why we have to keep getting the continuing ed, even though I've been in the field for years. I learn something every time I come, or it means something different to me than when I heard it in school.
Absolutely.
And so I think with students sometimes, until they do it, that's I don't know, not to argue,
Oh, yeah.
what she was thinking or that type of thing, but I think that's, our role when we supervise them to use that as you did in educating them. But it is not something I was accustomed to a lot. With the code of ethics, there's still parts that I'm like, okay, I know that this is how I am to do this, but it still may not be exactly my belief system. I don't know.
Right.
So I just think that in the beginning I was a little shocked sometimes too with students, but then I realized it was sometimes like a culture shock to them when they were actually put in these positions and all the emotions and everything they have to deal with.
Yep.
It's tough.
Absolutely.
And I've just realized too, with these questions, I should probably be walking around the room closer to the individuals so that Columbia can hear it. Can I detach the mic and hold it for them, or?
If you want, I've also got this one though. So
Okay.
we're picking up some of it.
Yeah, okay, good. So I can always stand a little bit closer at least. So if I'm standing by you while you're talking, it's not too intimidating. So I guess, Corey.
Great.
Hi, I'm Corey Miller. I'm an MSW, LMSW. I am a case manager over at BJC Behavioral Health, and I was a BWET scholar back in 2015, I want to say. I was asked to kind of speak from the student's perspective. And I've been going back and forth because I haven't been supervising students, but I love students, so I steal them from other people often at my office. So I did my first practicum, I don't know if I can, I did a life crisis, so on purpose. I had a small baby and wanted to work at nights, so it was perfect. So I did my, the short one, foundation there. Completed it, started immediately over at BJC. And day number one, go sit down and they start talking about a client. And I'm like, oh, crud. I just talked to this person on the hotline. Because St. Louis is a big little town, especially in regards to social services. And that kept happening. And clients and I knew things that were contrary to what was being reported in the meeting. And I had to be like, can I say anything right now? Because I know this from a different context, and I'm not, and I personally had to step back and say, is this important for me to share or is it not? Like breaking the confidentiality. And I determined it wasn't because it had nothing to do with their safety. It was their mental illness with what they were sharing about. And had to kind of step back and evaluate that. And then later I let my supervisor know, hey, so that client of yours, I'm not going to be able to meet with that client. I have prior knowledge of them. She can't go on my tiny little caseload. And she agreed, and that kind of was it, and we could have those open conversations. But I think, and also working with clients, the confidentiality comes up a lot. I had access to giant databases in both of those practicums. And you hear about it, and then it's another thing to see another practicum student get terminated because they have accessed it. Or staff, while I was at BJC, a huge purging happened because they had accessed those files inappropriately. And having those conversations, because I don't work with just MSWs and social workers. I work with a broad range of different disciplines that don't necessarily follow our code of ethics. So I'm really glad that I actually work for an organization that chooses to follow the MSW code, which makes it a lot easier for me because that's just company policy. I don't have to say I can't have a dual relationship because it's laid out in company policy. And so that's just something that as a student, I had to evaluate and also talk other students through and be like, so just don't do it. Don't be tempted, don't look stuff up. Don't be curious. It's going to lead you through a rabbit hole that's not going to be good for you. And just have very direct conversations about it with students. So that's my little bit.
Yeah, I should have let you present on confidentiality. Well versed at this point. So are there any questions and comments for Corey? Similar experiences?
I had the same issue during my practice in life crisis, and I worked at BJC as a community support specialist at the time. And I was actually getting calls after hours during my practicum for other clients on my team, other clients within the agency, and a lot of conversations with my field instructor. Am I responsible? Am I liable to tell them, that client called me the other day and blah, 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 because BJC does not get reports from life crisis the way they do from DHR. And it was clearly no. And I had to be taught that and explained why none of them were ever hurting themselves. If they were, we did what we needed to do to make them be okay. And then they were call back on the client to say, hey, I went to the ER the other day because of whatever reason. But that happens often because St. Louis, like you said, is a big small town.
That is the perfect summation of St. Louis, as both of you mentioned. And then our dean has something to say.
No, I was just going to reiterate what Corey said. I think it's a really good point that, our curiosity will lead us to seek out information. And, for our students, as we get into agencies and you get access to databases and you want to, who's in there that I might know, kind of thing. You just have to be really cautious of having that information because once you have that information, it really puts you in a vulnerable situation when you encounter those people that you see them for the first time, and in the back of your mind, you're like, oh, I know about your case with X, Y, that kind of thing. So just be really, I just wanted to reiterate, being really cautious about how much information we seek out once we have access to certain systems.
And I would even say in the stories that we tell each other as well, we're people's story bearers a lot in case management and just in our field. We hear the best and the worst in their lives, and sometimes it's kind of fascinating. both clinically like I'll be like, oh my gosh, this is really clinically fascinating. Like this, I do discharges and I love to do them just because I get to read their entire like breadth of services. And some of it, like you'll get a story in it and you'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm really social, but I'll be like, I totally want to tell somebody about this, but you can't, like, or you'll have a client do something that, you know, you'll tell your supervisor about or something like that, but it's really not clinically appropriate to be telling anybody else if it's not for a clinical reason. And it being a really cool story is not a clinical reason to share anything. And so just reminding also clients of, or not clients, students of that as well. And reminding myself with that, when I'm telling students stories, it needs to be a clinically important reason that I'm telling them. For instance, I had to go inpatient and the supervisor was like, hey, put up your hair in a bun because your ponytail can get grabbed in inpatient. That happened to me. Those kind of stories are an important story to hear. And it was in a clinical reason. She wasn't just telling me about how she was being attacked in inpatient psych. So,
and then, you know, Dean Johnson just mentioned something as well, and I just met with the BSW practicum students about to start their seminar, and social media. You know, not only do you now have this immense and immeasurable knowledge of this individual and personal details of their lives, but you have like that, you know, of course you have information you want to share it. That's, we as social beings typically want to do that. And I think with social media, sometimes we lose focus, we lose filter. We think that what we say on social media can't be followed with repercussions. All it takes is a screenshot or a share and things can become viral. For example, SORTS, the facility I've mentioned a couple of times, there are multiple articles in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And I'm not saying they've been social workers, but we've seen, and it's obvious that it's staff commenting on the articles because they're sharing things that only people would know who have treated these individuals. And it's really concerning. And you know, they're educated on confidentiality the same that we are, but we're ultimately tasked at a professional level to safeguard that. And so Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Snapchat, all of the forms of social media that I'm sure I'm out of the loop at this point, but just be mindful of that. So what Corey's been saying applies the same way to social media. So, did you have a comment?
Okay, hello, my name is Maggie Gross. I graduated back in 2007 from Washington University with my MSW. I got my LCSW in 2010, and I also have what's called a co-occurring disorders professional diplomat certification, which I'm a certified substance abuse counselor. My ethical or value conflict, so I supervised students for many years. I got up to 3 students for one semester, and that was it. I'm down to just 1 right now. But I'm going to present something that keeps reoccurring with students over the years. And that is, we were asked to come up with an ethical or value concern. And one of them is, I currently work for Marygrove, which is a children's home in Florissant, Missouri, and I've been there for 8 years. I'm a therapist for the independent and transitional youth, 17 to 22. I primarily work with young men. Prior to that, I worked at Community Treatment, Inc., or ComTree in Jefferson County with adult substance abuse counselors. I did detox and inpatient, and then moved to outpatient in their Arnold, Festus, and DeSoto locations. So this dilemma has been in both of those agencies. That's why I decided to bring this up. And that happens to be that on both agencies, when I've been on a treatment team, I am the only social worker on that team. I am the only social work-minded person on that team. Many of the staff that are on the team have a high school diploma. That means many of the things that they do, my students have issues with. right? So this might go under the duty to warn type thing when it comes to an ethical dilemma. So they observe a lot of things that the other staff do, that social workers would be like, oh no, we can't do that. Such as allowing a client to wear their flip-flops while they're working, or handing over their work keys in a locked facility, and allowing the client to go unlock the snack drawer for themselves. Or a residential technician decides to date an ex-client. So I can keep going on and on, but you guys see where I'm going, right? You see where I'm headed? So the one that I want to present is the one that's the biggest issue, where a residential technician, and again, this is, not everybody goes by our values or our ethics, so they do not act accordingly. And sometimes I try to teach the students that you will be the only person on your team sometimes that has to stand up for the client.
But do the agencies not have policies?
They do, and I'm gonna get, yeah. So I'm gonna get to that. So I want to present one particular, the one with the res tech who is a high school student dating the ex-client. So that actually is the worst case scenario for me, in that the ex-client sued the company and myself privately. He sued me and the agency for breach of confidentiality because I notified my supervisor within the agency. My student notified me that she found out that they were dating. I was her clinical supervisor for an internship. I notified my supervisor, and then my supervisor and me had to sit down with his supervisor. So they were suing because they stated that I notified too many people. So I went and got my own legal counsel. I called the NASW 1-800 hotline, and they said, no, you are within your rights as a social worker. You are doing everything that you need to do. And they actually provided me with lawyers. And so the agency had their lawyers as well representing me, but I also had to get my own lawyer to represent me. But that is like the worst case scenario, is yes, the agency does have policies and procedures, and so I try to tell my students, our duty is to warn. So if you see something that's not right or unethical or a value conflict, then report it. And then it's up to the supervisors to do something about it. But many times, like in smaller instances, the students have difficulty with letting go, they want to be in control of what happens to that employee. And that's not where our job is as social workers. It's only our duty to warn, and it's up to the supervisors of the agency policies to change and or make those, judgment calls as far as what happens, as a result of having that information. But in that particular instance, we went through the proceedings of the legal counsel. We had to sit in Clayton for many hours and get depositions and all that kind of stuff. And once we provided, the agency and myself provided documentation, it was then our lawyer's turn to then ask for his documentation. That's when he crumbled and dropped all charges. So, because then we were asking for his substance abuse history, we were asking for his mental health history, and that was going to be presented in court. And at that point, I think, I don't know, but, the lawyers just stated that, he didn't really have, we have to know what our rights are as social workers, is that it's okay to warn. Now you're not blaring it on social media, you're not telling everybody on your, neighborhood, but you do have a duty to warn and tell supervisors. And I think that that's the most difficult challenge with my students, is observing other people not thinking that handing over keys to unlock a snack cabinet, they wouldn't do that, and they're questioning that. It's like, yeah, they're not supposed to do that, and they've been under training, so let's notify their supervisor. Or there's been in other meetings people making discriminatory remarks or cursing in a meeting, not being professional. So it's like, okay, let's sit. And at times there's been where We sit with the university as well, and so the university professors are informed of it, and we're sitting with the actual agency supervisor. So usually it's notifying, everybody that needs to be notified. Any questions?
That's the importance, I think, of having a social worker in the field as a field instructor, because as you mentioned, not everyone has our ethics, and what if this is what they were observing and had no one to bounce that off? Then we have people going into the field in an acute mental health setting just saying, here, take my keys. So it's good that they can receive that knowledge from people like the panelists and people in this room.
My turn, I guess, huh? All right. My name is Mandy Bolin. I'm a clinical manager at Behavioral Health Response, BHR, and got my MSW here at UMSL in 2008. A long time, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker now. What you just told is horrifying, for one. No, it's good. I've been sitting here and just taking notes about what I could share, and I don't have anything horrifying to say. So I first want to say that I feel like our social work classes and programs are really good. I love the students that come out of these classes and want to go save the world and send all the money to everybody. And so I think the things that I wrote down are more so about how do you take ethics on paper and what you learn in a course and apply it to ethics in practice. And, there's just a lot of gray area, in my opinion. So, I remember when I came out of school and I thought, you don't give a gift or take a gift from anybody ever. Or, you never self-disclose anything about your life whatsoever. Don't you dare do it. That's how I heard it. And it turns out that's not entirely true. So I think, with students, a lot of what we do on the crisis line is to try to help them operate in that gray space and sort of figure out what's okay and what's not. So I wrote down some experiences that I've had in my role, that students have had in terms of, like Corey was talking about, sort of that, having that dual role, where a lot of students have full-time jobs in somewhere else in another agency, and then they're also doing a practicum with you. And so, you can know things about people who are being served in both areas. You can also think, I'm Mandy at Children's Division, and so here's my information on how to reach Mandy at the crisis line, and I'm going to be here at 5 p.m., and you can call me on the crisis line, and we'll get you an outreach. And we can't really serve in both of those capacities, right? So that's sort of one example on the dual roles for us. We have, we serve clients sometimes that are in the news. So when I was thinking about what you share and what you don't share, I'm thinking about high-profile people, stories that are horrifying and sad and have reached the public sphere, and that, you can consult and speak to your supervisor as a student, but you can't go home and share this with your partner and tell them that you were able to help this person that they just read about in the news, right? And sometimes knowing when to say stuff and when not to and who to say it to can be challenging. You were mentioning social media, so I had remembered, you have to teach students that you can't look people up on social media. Sometimes we're curious to know who we're serving, and, just not necessary to do that. Every once in a while, we've done it to try to find somebody for an active rescue, but for the most part, I wouldn't encourage that. I was thinking about gifts. I have a drumstick from somebody who I did an outreach on. It was the worst day of his life. And he ran after me at the end and gave me a drumstick and said, I really want you to have this. I've never felt this hopeful before. I'm not bragging on myself, but I kept the drumstick because I thought it would do more harm to that person than saying, no, I can't take that.
And for clarification, it was not a chicken drumstick that's now
It was not food. It was not food. It was not food. It was a beat up little, actual drumstick, and it meant something to him. So, I think about self-disclosure. We talk about lived experience and, being okay to share that, hey, I've been through something similar, and, you know, it was really hard, and I was able to get help and find support, and here's how, and I believe in you that you can do this, and you're not alone. And that sounds different than saying, well, I can't tell you anything about myself, right? So there's a balance, there's a gray area to me for, you know, self-disclosure and how to connect with people as well. The other one, I think this is the last one I wrote down, sort of a value conflict and thinking about language. People in crisis say really horrifying words and things that may be offensive to you if you don't use that type of colorful language. And it's not okay to tell them that you will not speak to them unless they stop cursing. And that's been something that, you know, I think some students learn sort of over time that, you know, we just have to be able to sit with people even if they are saying things that make us feel a little bit uncomfortable. So those are all of the things that I wrote down.
No, I think that's
Anything
great
else?
because you covered a lot of the gray areas that we face with the code of ethics and just trying to practice as professionals. So are there any questions or comments about what Mandy was saying?
I appreciate what you say because I think sometimes when I come to these ethics trainings, then I'm always like, oh my God, I thought it was, you know, just everything seems so clear, but they never are. So I find a lot of the, you know, other than the very obvious ones, right? There is so much gray and individual context, relationship kinds of things that make it, and a lot of times too, because I think social work often, especially if you're a community support worker, these boundaries are very blurry. You know, you're very close to them. You might be the only person that this client sees as their everything, you know, and you have to, you know, how do you navigate some of those things can be very tricky, which is where, you know, obviously the supervision and guidance and asking questions because it gets confusing.
It does.
So I appreciated that.
So something that I picked up when I was in grad school, I see that there's still a few students here, are I think 5 friends that are quality. Like people in classes that I agreed with, I really respected. We actually sat at orientation, I think at that table over there. And I still meet with them. We're in all different kinds of fields of practice, and we have amazing conversation. I wish we got together more often, but families, kids, careers make it difficult. And they just help me continue to have that conversation. I think we can a lot of times practice on an island, it feels like. And I think having students and they can feel like they're on little islands too, because we deal with such strong emotions all day, that keeping connected in supervision, even if we're no longer needing supervision because we're licensed, but keeping up those conversations and asking if we feel like icky about something, because that's normally how I know I'm having an ethical issue, is that I feel icky. That's pretty much my like radar on it. And having those conversations with people that are in different, like we're all social workers, but we're all approaching different kinds of social work. Some are in management positions now, some of us are in direct practice. So we just approach things from that different perspective. And teaching, I always try to tell students when I have them to make friends with people you're in school with, like find those people, be kind to each other. And you'll know quality. You know quality in class when people make comments and things like that. And seek out those relationships because they really will continue to help you grow long after grad school is done. So one of our friends left a position and we were all networking to get her a new position really quick. Things like that you never know you're gonna need. So that was the one thing I wanted to say.
Add to that. So one of the things I want to tell you guys too is, I just want to add to what Corey was saying is once I'm a supervisor, I'm always a supervisor as well. One of my interns is with me today, Mindy. And for today, I told all of my interns I was going to be here today. And I sent them all the link. And I email them frequently, and they email me frequently. So we keep that support system growing. So even though my example was you are the only social worker on your team, I do encourage every one of my students to have a support group of social worker-minded people so that they can bounce those ideas off. And so if any of my past interns or students came to me and asked me a question, they have my cell phone number, they can text me, they email me, and I still follow them. I helped 3 of them get the jobs that they have now currently, and they keep the ongoing networking going. So that's really, really huge in social work.
Yeah, I think it's important for students to understand, as you were talking about with cohorts, at Mineral Area College where we do our outreach program, it's a much smaller cohort, and of course there are always interpersonal dynamics, but even in these larger cohorts, and I tell them, you never know when you're going to pick up the phone and call for a resource, and it's that person you were rude to in class. Right. Now, ethically, they're going to want to help you, but they may not be as friendly when they do it. And then also just explaining to students, like, even if you're unhappy with this current practicum, this experience, another coworker, just remember that you might want a job here later, that person might move to the job that you want, and you need their support. So it's always important to act as a professional, even as a student, which is why, hopefully the Code of Ethics is flashing up a few times throughout your education, and why we have like guidelines for students as they go to embark on contacting agencies, because I've had emails that have said like, hey, will you take a student, LOL, and I'm like, no. No, usually I teach that, I use that as a teaching moment and say, we are interested in having a practicum student. However, I just wanted to call it to your attention that you need to work on professional emails whenever you're contacting a professional. So I don't know, other experiences or other things that panelists want to say about what's been shared?
One other one.
Yeah. No, don't be sorry. You're the panelist.
So I'll talk about an incident we had with some students in the fall of last year, and they were not UMSL students, so I can be like, because I was like, this is not okay.
We paid her to say that. Okay.
Yes, they were not UMSL students. Actually, no, I was telling my supervisor that. I was like, they are not UMSL MSWs. So we had difficulty having students show up. Like, legit, like, so you get hours, and I had to finally say, have like a heart-to-heart, and she wasn't even my student, and be like, so this is your job. Like, yes, you're not getting paid right now, but this is your job, this is your contact to get a job. And you need to be here. And that was multiple students felt that it was optional to come.
And we like to hire our students.
Yes.
And I tell them that I'm like,
Yeah.
I will teach you, I'm a master's student, and they are an undergrad. I will teach them how to do my job.
Mm-hmm.
No, they can't do it next May when they graduate, but if they decide to get their MSWs, they will know how to do assessments when they get there. Everything I can do, I like telling them all the time, you can do what I do. And so why would you poop on being able to work for BJC if that's what you want to do? Because we will gladly take our students, especially if a field instructor is like, I love her, she's great, hey, I heard another team. I don't care, like, why would you do that?
You have to come and be professional and contribute and not sit in the corner. I got bored as a student sitting in the corner. I'm not good at it. Nobody puts Corey in the corner. Like, I get antsy and bored. I want to do stuff. I'm not going to have you don't learn by sitting next to me and not talking to a client. You learn by doing. I'm going to slide the computer over. I'm going to edit everything, and we're going to talk about how to make this assessment better. And my supervisor knows that's what I'm doing when my billing is a little longer than usual. but if you don't show up, I'm not able to give that to you. And yeah, that was a huge ethical thing. And we actually had to ask a student not to come back in the middle of a practicum because they were not consistent. And we're like, you're going to have to start your practicum somewhere else all over again. But you're not welcome to be here. And then another student that didn't like how we were doing things, which, I mean, whatevs. But it's not, you can go about having that conversation without being, I mean, our jobs are pretty hard. You don't need to let us know that you don't like what we're doing and how we're doing it in a very kind of like rude manner. That goes in through supervision and that kind of thing. So we had a few issues with that and great field instructors that handled those situations, but it made it hard for other people to want to take students after that because a bad student, unfortunately, can make somebody that not want a student for a very long time because it's an added thing that they do because they care. So
that's happened in my agency right now. We have 4 social workers, but only 2 of us will take students because of past students' behaviors.
Yeah,
because they just don't want to deal with it.
I think, it is both a privilege to have a student and a privilege as a student to be supervised by people in your field. And unfortunately, some students are going to take that for granted or take advantage of that. There have been times, at least I know I have, and I'm sure Patty and Diane have been called in, for people not showing up, for people dressing inappropriately and not really taking, and a lot of times we try to work with the field instructor and say, how would you address that issue if this wasn't a student? So are you comfortable addressing this issue? Do we need to step in? Because it's a supervisory experience for the field instructor that we don't want to cheat them of either. But I've had students who look at their timesheets and say, well, I only have to be here 2 days a week and I only have to do this. And I'm like, well, it's not only about you. Like if an agency is requesting that you're there 3 days a week to provide more consistent therapy, then you need to work that out with the agency. And then also working with the agency to say, they are focused on their hours because this is a goal they have to complete, and it's definitely not coming out the right way, or that they're unappreciative of the experience. So I think as field instructors, it's great whenever you can take a step back and remember what it was like being a student, and then remembering why you're doing what you're doing with them, because they need your experience as students, as professionals, and you all do such a great job, it sounds like, with who you're working with.
I had situations where students engaged with some triangling situations, where one staff is having trouble with another staff, and they're taking it all in and kind of joining the vengeance or whatever. I tried approaching it from family systems understanding, and I got nowhere. I think I should have gone to the school with it, because there was no horrible things happening to any clients, but it was highly inappropriate.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get her to understand that.
Because our code of ethics apply to colleagues as well. So have panelists have similar experiences that you can share, and maybe how you handled that?
I mean, that's hitting the nail on the head of my discussion is that, observing other staff members and how they behave. And sometimes my students are observing it and reporting on it and saying, yeah, that's not good. But then other students of mine join in of the unhealthy type behaviors. And I've gotten UMSL, I've gotten SLU, I've gotten WashU, I've gotten Fonbon. They all have my email, they all have my phone number, and unfortunately a lot of the universities know my name, because I take so many students, and that's been the hugest benefit for me as far as being a supervisor in the field, is having that support from the universities. That is so important for me. And when I sit down and talk to the universities and share what's going on, they are 100% behind me. I feel extremely supported. and they are like, we will reiterate this to the students. We will, and each time, during the evaluations, I'm honest with universities. I'm like, please, will you please teach them this, or can you incorporate this in some of the classwork? And one of them does happen to be, one is not getting into the power struggles with staff too, not just with the clients, but not with the staff as well.
I think it's a good conversation to have with the student. We all work on a continuum of sometimes being more burnout than other times. Some of us work for bigger organizations that have more policies that can rub us the wrong way. And I think I have to remind myself of who I'm talking with. Am I talking with a colleague right now, or am I talking to a student? And is this appropriate for me to say right now? Because sometimes I'm a verbal processor, and I really want to verbally process, but am I verbally processing this in the right space? And also teaching students about that, having those conversations, and also admitting when you're wrong and you've said something that you shouldn't. And I've had to do that, and step back and kind of catch myself, because some of practicum students, they're the same age as me, or not much younger, and so it can be hard to sometimes remember student. And I think just kind of reminding yourself of that, and I think calling them on it and having some conversations, and having that be part of supervision, which we do in my LCSW anyway. We have those conversations about organization and things like that, because that's a really hard part of the ethical code that a lot of people struggle with, is that part. So, and you can say, I struggle with this. It's okay to say that to a client. This is hard. This part is hard for me. So.
Humanizing the code of ethics. We're not all perfect. We're going to struggle with areas in different situations. Maybe you've always been great with working with students and colleagues, and now you have a student or colleague that's making your life a little bit more difficult. That's when you depend on, if you're fortunate enough to be in licensure supervision, you have that supervisor, you have your direct supervisor, you have us as resources as well. We're so happy that people are willing to provide their experience to these students. It's as a BSW that you have 3 years of experience, and as an MSW that you have 2 years of post-grad experience. So that way, you know what you're doing and the roles that you're in, and even as you're learning, you can point that out to the students, and also be willing to point out when you've made errors, like Corey said. So are there any final questions? We have about 5 minutes. For any of the panelists, or any comments that people just want to make, or experiences they want to share. Don't make me pull up the NASW Code of Ethics to kill 5 minutes. Now, basically, what we have are these lovely evaluations of this experience. It's always helpful to hear how we could have done better. It's always helpful to know what you liked and didn't like. If you did receive, or if you paid for CEUs, when can they get those, Diane?
I don't know when, but they'll be emailed to you.
So they will be emailed. Make sure that they have a current email for you. I'm assuming they did if you found your way here. I think if there are follow-up questions, or if you're curious about presentations, email the social work events email, and they can contact us and get copies and send them out if needed. Like I know Julie Bertram's is going to be sent out. I think it's phenomenal, the information we heard from Sarah and Jamie earlier, and then also from Julie Bertram and our panelists. Just one thing that I was thinking about whenever Julie was speaking is one of the guides that I use as a clinician, because it's gauged and made for clinicians working with therapeutic medications. There's an app called BH, and then there's a space, and it's meds, behavioral health meds. It's a guide put out by ATTC, and it puts it in very common language and helps you understand antidepressants and anxiolytics and so on and so forth. And then I think her slides, once we get those, were very educational as well. But there was so much information to share. So any final questions, please make sure you do that. You can turn it in to Diane over there. Diane, is there follow-up that we need to do? Any follow-up from you?
I don't think so, except just to say thank you again for coming. It's been great having you here, and we've really appreciated the conversation, the dialogue that's gone back and forth. Thanks to our panel and to Justin, who did a great job with your presentation and with facilitating our panel. So thank you. If you all have any questions, give us a holler. You can surely email the social work events at UMSL email, or you can email me. Just give us a holler if you need anything or have any questions.
So,
Thanks so much.
yeah, and reflecting on what Sharon said, given the Stockley verdict, you know, be mindful of the ways that you're taking home, take time to reflect. It seems like we hear more and more about these incidences, and as long as we're practicing from a wise mind and not an emotional, I think that we can be very effective in what we do and how we approach social situations and injustices. So please be mindful on your way home. Please reflect peacefully about that. And again, please let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you all.
Thank you.